Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Growth Show. I'm joined with Tom Pickering and David Berkeley today as we explore relationships and how important they are within business. So David, what's your take on relationships and the importance within business?
I think they're the lifeblood. I think they're absolutely essential to any kind of good business. My general view is that people should use time to build relational capital. I think a lot of the time in business, people are so keen to get to the end outcome of what they want that they don't spend any time actually sort of making deposits in the relational capital bank before they want to make a withdrawal. And what I mean by that is just spend time really getting to know people, what makes them tick, and what you can do for them to actually help them, or what can you do to support them. So many of my clients, when they're looking for investment, going all the way around, just trying to, knock on all the doors, get all the money they can, which is that's the game. That's what you're trying to do, is get the investment cash, and there's no problem with that. But spend the time to build relationships, because then when you need to get that investment capital, at least people are going to give you far more time, open doors more, and give you the time of day really to allow you to get ahead. And that's just obviously an example of in building investment. But certainly with clients, certainly with key people around your business, just build relational capital so that when you're in a tough situation, which a lot of businesses are right now, you've got that relational capital to fall back on. You've got some depth to relationship to build from during tough times.
And why do people not take the time to build those relationships?
Because we're in too much of a rush. I think people are busy on the wrong things. I think people get... people are pressured by deadlines and sales targets and building their business as fast as they can, whatever it is. But actually, what really, really helps business go further, I believe, is depth of relationship with key people. I think that is so critical. And I think we so often trying to get to the outcome that we clearly want, and we use people quite transactionally, or I've seen people do that, where you just go, great, this person's the gatekeeper to the VC money, or the big deal that I can get. I just need them to sign on the dotted line, and we don't actually treat them fundamentally as a human with needs, and people to build relationships with that can last longer and go further than what people necessarily think just on the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, what have you got to add to that?
I'd agree with everything that David said. I'd add that all we have is the present. And there's a lot of focus, I think, in business about talking what might happen tomorrow, but actually, largely, tomorrow is not here. Actually, our experience of pretty much everything profit in businesses is dictated by experience of the now. And I think what's interesting, just to build on David's point, is that I started thinking actually relationships are more important when things are difficult, which of course they are, because in order to have a difficult discussion, you need to have a stronger relationship. But actually, having thought about that, I think, and that's actually incredibly true in battlefield situations, where soldiers form such strong bonds between each other. When they come out of it, even though it's an awful situation, it's very difficult to replicate. It's that love, and actually, it's actually the concept of giving without expecting anything in return. And giving is a very, very powerful thing. I think it's absolutely critical at the moment because, in particular, we are isolated. Okay, so we have. I think we're rediscovering what intimate relationships look like. And if you remember the first part of the shutdown, people were stopping and talking to people they'd never seen before. There's a lot of reset of relationships in terms of who was seen as being great. Was it the Alan Sugars of this world, to use an awful example, or was it the nurses? And the nurses certainly won that battle. So, but I think the other thing is, in terms of the dialogue we're having, it's vital, even when we're on this call today, that actually the relationship is just not saying nice things to each other, but actually, are we learning as human beings? Because as human beings, we do not have an option to stay still. So I think it's about how the dialogue is. Are we being ourselves? And some really simple things. So I think to acknowledge people for who they are, and take an interest to understand a different opinion, and actually think that's okay, rather than trying to self-impose. But it's a very fine dividing line between what we're, to answer the question you asked to David was, why don't we do it? I think we're largely taught to be self-reliant, and I think the concept of being reliant on other people, which we are, and the whole human race has been survival of which has been dependent on other people, which is very much around the relationships we've got with people around us. And so, at its most extreme end, actually marginalising people is one of the worst things you can do to people. And I think it's with a difficult challenge, relationships is the lifeblood of a business.
Absolutely. And David, can we teach relationship building? You can. Good. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's explore that a little bit.
So there's kind of a few ways you can do that. Number one is to understand how different people work. There's loads of textbooks on that kind of stuff. There's loads of books on it. Probably the most famous being How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a brilliant book, and I'd highly recommend people read it every few years, actually, because it's just full of nuggets and really good stuff like that. There's also some various profiling tools that can be helpful in understanding various aspects. I'm not the biggest fan of profiling tools because it tends to put people in boxes. I don't think people do fit in boxes that well, but it can allow you to understand certain character traits around different people. I think one of the key things, though, and probably the first place I start with anybody, is just understanding yourself more. What is it that we bring to relationships? And the vast majority of people I know have no idea. They have no idea why people like them. None at all. And one of the first things I get to do with any client is I say, go and find 5 people. And I'd probably encourage you guys to do it. And anybody watching this, go and find 5 or 6 people that you really trust. Could be family, could be friends, could be work colleagues, clients, whoever it is. And ask them what they most value in the relationship with you. If you're British, this is phenomenally awkward. And I don't know anybody who's found this easy to do, because it is the weirdest thing you could possibly do being British. If you're American, this would be a walk in the park, generally. But what it allows us to do is get some depth of understanding on what we bring to relationships. You ask 4, 5, 6, 7 people, and you'll get some common threads coming back. And I pretty much guarantee there'll be things that we undervalue in ourselves. We undervalue in what we bring to relationships, because that's just how we operate. So that's, you get people giving you feedback saying you're just a really trustworthy person. Well, we kind of think, well, yeah, but what's the alternative to being an untrustworthy person? But if trust is something we really value, or someone values, that's how they're going to operate from that point. So they'll naturally undervalue it in terms of what they're bringing to a relationship. And that's where I just encourage anybody watching this, is a really easy action point, really easy take home. Find out why people like you. Find out what you bring to relationships, and you'll be the huge step forward in understanding some of your business success.
I think that's great. And Tom, do you think there's anything management can do to sort of nurture that behaviour, rather than business development can be seen as fairly transactional? But actually, we all know that the secret to good winning business and friends is actually by building relationships. So what can management do to sort of help push people in the right direction?
Yeah, well, I think at its simplest form, one of the things I've realised quite recently is it starts with the board, actually, Nick. I think we talked about, is it all about us or is it all about somebody else? And I think that starts with the company. And a lot of board members, I think the company's all about them. And actually they're not. It's not. They are actually legally and technically, they're actually servants of the company, who should have a fairly open mind as to how appropriate they are to suit the needs of that company. And that's at a very, very fundamental level, because it does start with leadership, and people who are in positions of leadership, people will follow them, right? So I'm very much of the view that's where it starts. I think the challenge is that everybody's doing the best they can, so we all adopt different patterns, different ways of doing things without really having much guidance on this stuff that we've found sort of works or sort of doesn't work. And actually, I think one thing, so we talked about putting other people first. The challenge is actually not just talking about that, but actually actioning that. So what actually is the specific action from that perspective that you can take to for me to put you first, Nick. And we've had that dialogue in terms of how we've been working together recently, and that completely transforms. But it's not about talking; it's about taking the action, and it's about experiencing the outcome. It's not just for me, but it's also for you. So, what does that feel like? And then that becomes a self-fulfilling situation. And actually, I think the other thing, it's about new action as well. So, I think when we're having dialogue like this, it's important we learn, but actually we take action. So, if we say we're going to do something, we do it. That really matters in terms of the credibility of us. But actually where the money is actually taking new action, and that's something quite different. And that's something quite unique and becomes increasingly difficult to do if things are tough, because we when things get tough, we revert back to previous patterns almost completely automatically. So I'm spending a lot of my time at the moment running the Winning Thinking program, which shines a light in these situations to take different perspectives and take different actions. And it's such an exciting journey. But it's not to be underestimated, I think, in terms of the challenge. I think humour as well is very important, and it's one of the last things. And I think what humour does is it levels us. So if I can make you laugh, Nick, or particularly if I can get someone where you haven't necessarily got a good relationship with them, if you can make them laugh, it brings you both immediately onto the same level from which you can then have a more productive discussion. So rightly or wrongly, my sense of humour is a little bit wayward from time to time, but I actually go out of my way sometimes to deploy humour, which is a very practical thing to do. And I think the other thing is also if people are angry, to avoid engaging. The reason for that is if you're, if anybody ever communicates with you when you're angry, what they'll actually tell you is actually their worst fears. It's actually got nothing to do with you whatsoever, which is actually very interesting if you want to know what someone's worst fears are. But actually, it's not very helpful for the recipient to know what if they don't know what they're receiving. So anger is straight out of the amygdala, and it's not massively helpful. So I think there's a few things to avoid doing, but I think it's it's about, in terms of dialogue, it's also, I think it's about the reporting, Nick. So practically, it's important to talk about progress. It's easy to think, well, I'm doing all the work, and that's just not true. So it's important to understand what people are doing, what achievements they've got, what are the issues they've got, so you understand how they, what are they struggling with, how can you help each other, which is then the juncture to do something useful. What are the actions they're proposing to take? So that as a leader, I'm thinking actually, well, what might the implications, be of that? So rather than say, look, I don't like that, might ask a question. What might the implications of that be on such and such? To develop the teamwork, to increase the bar. I think there are then things that fall out of people's responsibilities. So it's a good opportunity to reinforce accountability and identify gaps, and to build people up. And at its simplest level, I was actually at a cafe. My daughter sells cakes to the local cafe, and today she's only 13, but she had to negotiate. She hadn't been paid for 3 of her last deliveries, and of course, a 13-year-old girl speaking to a cafe owner asking for payment is quite a daunting thing. But there was no way on this earth I was going to, actually step in and ask for payment myself. So she found her own way, which was a delightful way. My daughter's got a lovely way about it. It's not what I would have done, but she eventually found a way of doing it, and then she had the interaction, and it was all fine. And that's an example of stepping over the edge, and that's what gives us confidence, and that's what raises the bar and capability in the organisations, I think.
Absolutely. And I think coming on to David's points on sort of tips to get people started, I think there's a lot of expectation on transactional. Like, relationships are the opposite of transactions. They take time, and they take numerous touch points. And the most important thing for me throughout all of it is the ability to actually listen and remember. And it's the small things that impact everything. It's remembering someone when they were ill, or they played a sport, or they've just had a child, or it's their birthday or anniversary. Just to evidence the fact that you just took a few moments to listen, and the impact that has, and support. There are so many opportunities right now to support great businesses, to support people having bad times, just for little comments through LinkedIn, whatever it might be. And there's too much expectation that you just phone someone completely cold build a relationship and that's it. It's a gradual process. As with dating, as with getting married, even though I was fairly quick to do that, to be honest, there are steps you have to take in there. And I'd fully encourage anyone who is actually banging their head about building relationships to say, if you haven't had 6 to 7 sort of different touch points, then I don't know what you're getting upset about. It does take time. You've got to figure out the settings. You've got to ask the right questions so you can actually find some commonality. And to young people starting out in any kind of relationship-based job, don't have an impression of what you think professionalism looks like. If you're in a relationship-based job, you probably got hired because you built a relationship through an interview process. Be yourself. Be brave enough to be yourself, as that's what got you hired. And if you're not yourself, it's the thing that will get you fired. Is the likelihood from it. Any other sort of tips, David, you give to people on that relationship build, or any points Tom mentioned you think you want to expand on?
Yeah, probably just some of the bits that you just talked on there. One of the fundamental human needs that we all have is to feel valued. There's nothing more, I don't know about you, but someone who doesn't hold a door open, they can see you're just about to walk through a door behind them, and they just don't pause for a fraction of a second, and you've got to catch the door before you break your nose. That really annoys me. But it means so much when someone just takes that, just pauses that half step just to hold a door, because it just shows that you've been appreciated. That's a very silly example, but it actually reveals a deep human need that we all have, which is to feel important. And if we view people as transactional, watch how quickly they dump you when you're not useful to them. If you haven't made someone feel valued. And so I'd always just say, it comes back to that thing, build the relational capital, just make people feel valued, show a genuine interest in them. To build rapport, you need 2 things in common with somebody. So find those 2 things. But people are very, very quick to get to the thing that they want, and not for the, building the relationship. And I just think, make people feel valued, remember their name. If you're starting out, particularly just as you were saying then, if you're starting out in an industry like that, carry around a little book or have notes on your phone, or if you meet somebody, I'm used to it, I can remember everything about people except their name, which is awful. And it's a dyslexic thing, apparently. But I just have to work really, really hard at remembering people's names. I can remember their cat's name. I can remember where they went to university. I can remember what they studied. I can remember the street name of where they lived in their 3rd year. I can remember the name of their boss from 4 jobs before. Those kind of things matter hugely. And just spend the time. It's much better to have 5 really deep relationships than 20 that are completely superficial.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that is being evidenced more than ever right now, I think, across the industry. Tom, anything to sort of conclude with?
Yeah, and I think it's important to use people's names. I mean, David talked about, actually action that, I intentionally use people's names to acknowledge people for who they are. I think it's important we don't sort of superimpose, our own view of relationships and other people, because we'll naturally form different relationships, and they'll all be a bit imperfect. And I think even if you just take all 3 of us, the challenge for us is, if we say something to each other that we disagree with, are we really interested in understanding what do we feel about that practically, to really understand where you're coming from, and not with a view to pride, but actually genuinely interested in that person, as opposed to your own I'm right, I'm wrong type discussion, which is the antithesis of, I think, what we're talking about. I think it doesn't cost anything to be polite, but I think politeness doesn't necessarily. I think politeness and respect for people is also about delivering difficult news. I think it's very important, if you care about someone, you actually don't misread. Put it in other words, customers that complain care, right? And they're your best sales force, and people misread that. And actually, watch out for the people who don't care and don't complain. So I think it's, when people deliver bad news, that's a difficult thing to do. It shows they care. So at its simplest level, I think as well, I turned around a construction business. One of the most dramatic things I did to to do that was to ban swearing, which you wouldn't imagine in at executive level, but it's absolutely, in any construction business, everyone swears. And I just stopped it because I could. I said, look, we're not going to. And actually, every time, and that included the other people that we were working with. And I think the other thing is if you've got those people, Nick, that are young people joining your type of organisation where they're having to pick up the phone and develop relationships, it's so important to create an environment around them, whilst they might be stepping out, to really make them feel valued for who they are. So when they take a knock, it's not a knock to them. It's something that they can bounce back from a place of knowing themselves, right? Because I think if you're not yourself and you take a bad knock, it actually challenges who you are. But if you're quite comfortable and you've got a team of people around you, exactly as you just said, people are taking active interest in whatever. I mean, what I might take an active interest in versus what you might take an active interest in with people might be different, but it's still taking active interest. So I think a lot of it's a heart thing, and it's about practicing, picking up the warning signs. So if people find themselves thinking I'm right or I'm wrong, then that should be a trigger. So I've got this wrong. What am I putting that person first? So it's just, but when you get to that place, Nick, I think this is the antithesis of education. A lot of education, which is all around, achieving transactions, achieving growth, or achieving this, or achieving that, and that tends to be all about you and me. When in fact the best way to achieve that is actually through supporting each other, which creates a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. And I'd say, I mean, I've got 3 children, and the priority for us raising them is their emotional intelligence, really, their ability to understand and read situations. I mean, that's what we're spending a lot of time, and being authentic. Like it's very hard to say. I think there's a lot of work to be done in most businesses on actually training people around relationships, and actually maybe abandoning the words business development and maybe just focusing on relationships, because business development already puts you off mark where you want to be heading. You're pointing the wrong way. Yeah. But there's a lot of work to be done on that, and there's a lot of coaching and mentoring that needs to happen to enable, especially young people coming through, to have the confidence to be themselves and to have that support network around them. And they need to have evidence to show that if you're not yourself, this is what happens. This is what ends up being the situation you're in. But guys, thank you so much for your time again today. That was awesome fun. Really enjoy these. Looking forward to the next one, and please keep your comments coming in on what you want us to discuss. Otherwise, we'll see you all very soon. All the best. Bye-bye.